Mourning and sadness filled everyone and number 39's homes and hearts. The youngest child, a baby just 4 years old, the joy and hope of his parents, had just died. They only have 2 beautiful and lovely daughters left. But the baby they just lost is still the most beloved because he is the youngest and the only son. What an infinite pain! The sisters love you, their hearts hurt like all the other gentle and young sisters. The sad looks on their parents and number 39's faces made the children even more miserable. The father was stunned, but the mother was the one suffering the most in this mourning scene. She stayed awake day and night beside her child and number 39's bed, caring for and caressing him. She felt deeply that her child was a part of her flesh and blood. She could never have imagined that he would die, and that they would put him in a coffin and lay him to rest in a cold grave. She still firmly believes that God cannot bear to lose her beloved child. Until the last moment, when there was no more hope, when she knew that she had completely lost her beloved child, she cried out, heartbroken. You probably don't and number 39's know anything about this. On this earth there are also his disciples, unscrupulous people who act according to their own interests, regardless of the pleas of a mother. While she was so sad, she no longer believed in God. She felt her thoughts become completely dark. Death is eternal, she thought. Once on the ground, people will turn into soil. And that and number 39's it. And so she had nowhere to rely on in her tribulation, no source of comfort. She was completely crushed in despair. She no longer cried, no longer paying attention to her 2 daughters who were lovingly wrapped around her. Her husband was sobbing next to her, but she neither heard nor saw him. Her whole being was completely captivated by the death of her little child. She remembered his lovely innocent gestures. She seemed to hear his gentle voice, his ridiculous words. The day of burial has arrived. Exhausted from staying up many nights of grief, the mother fell asleep in the early morning, next to her son and number 39's coffin. The family members quickly lifted the coffin slightly and carried it to the farthest room so that she could not hear the sound of hammers hammering nails into the lid of the coffin. When she suddenly woke up, she asked to see her son and number 39's face one last time. Her husband said, "The coffin is closed. Of course it has to be done. Oh! If God is cruel to me, how can humans be good to me?" she said while sobbing. The coffin was taken to the cemetery. The mother remained at home with her 2 daughters. Her eyes looked at her child but seemed to see nothing. She was immersed in sadness, unable to do anything, living like a machine. Her mind constantly floated from place to place like a ship being pushed by the wind in all 4 directions. The funeral day passed like that, followed by a series of sad and boring days. Her husband and children were heartbroken, tears flowing around them, looking at the poor mother and looking for words to comfort her, but she was inconsolable, and besides, what could her husband and children say to her? They are also suffering like her. Only sleep could give her a moment and number 39's rest, but she could n/39's sleep. Finally, the whole family gathered together to advise her and urge her to go to sleep. She lay down without saying a word. One night her husband listened to her breathing, thinking she was asleep, silently thanking God for calming her. Suffering and forgetting his worries in a few hours of sleep. He did not hear his wife wake up, and hastily dressed. She slipped out of the house and went to the place that fascinated her day and night, the place where her child was buried. She walked through the garden, to a field with a path leading to the cemetery. The road is deserted. Besides, no one who met her would know, because her eyes were only focused on one target: the row of trees in the cemetery ahead. That night was at the end of summer, the sky was very beautiful, it was warm. She entered the cemetery, went straight to her son and number 39's grave, which looked like a cluster full of fragrant flowers. She knelt down, resting her head on her baby son and number 39's grave. And clearly she saw its face with a beautiful smile like a fairy, with gentle, loving eyes, just like when it died when she held its stiff hand. Just as she sat at the head of her son and number 39's bed, she now sits at his grave. The only difference is that here she let her tears flow freely, trying to hold back the tears that she had previously tried to stop so as not to upset her dying child. Surely you want to go down there with your child, right? Right next to her, there was a deep, deep voice, but it sounded deep, clear and clear, reaching right into her heart. She stood up startled and saw a person wearing a black cloak and a cloth hood. That person and number 39's face was stern, but trustworthy, his eyes were bright and shining. "Come down with my child?" She shouted, "Oh my God! If you can take me to it, I will follow you immediately." "Think carefully," the other person replied. She felt the ground beneath her feet sink. The other person took off his coat and covered her body. Dark as pitch. She sank deeper into the soil than a gravedigger could ever reach with a spade. Suddenly the cloak fell and she found herself in a large, majestic, splendid room. The room was filled with a gentle light like sunset. Suddenly she felt on her arm, pressed tightly against her heart, her beloved son smiling at her, looking more beautiful than before. She shouted happily. Her screams had no echo on the dome. At that time a music was playing that was sometimes low and sometimes high, completely soothing her suffering. She had never heard sounds like that. The sounds echoed from behind the vast and heavy curtain separating the endless space. "My dear, gentle mother," the baby called out. She hugged her child and kissed him, her heart filled with endless joy. Her child pointed at the curtain and said, "Mom. Behind this curtain, life is much more beautiful than on Earth." "Hey Mom. Mom, have you seen my lovely friends? We are very happy, Mom." The mother looked, but saw nothing, because she was a mortal and could not be seen above. "Now I know how to fly, Mom." The child continued. "I flew to heaven with my friends, Mom. Mom, do you want me to fly with my friends? There, Mom is crying again. Mom, just let me go with my friends, and tomorrow I will see you forever. Stay for a while. Please stay a little longer. Let me hold my baby in my arms again." Saying this, she hugged her child tightly and tremblingly kissed him. Suddenly from the dome came the sobbing sound of someone calling her name. "Mom, did you hear that?" The child asked, "Your father is calling me." Then came the sounds of lamenting and sobbing of children. The voices of my sisters. "Mom, you still remember my sisters, right?" For the first time, she suddenly remembered her remaining relatives and felt scared. Looking up at the dome, she saw a group of relieved people flying past and disappearing behind the clouds. She felt like she saw among them people she had met on Earth. "Will her husband and 2 daughters fly over here?" No, because the calls and lamentations of her husband and 2 daughters came from outside the dome of the house. The baby said, "Mom, the sky bell is ringing, look. The sun has risen." At that moment, a bright light made her close her eyes. When she opened her eyes, her child was gone and she felt herself being lifted into the air. It was cold and she raised her head to see that she was lying on her son and number 39's grave, outside the cemetery. She had just experienced a dream, an illusion. God had just enlightened her mind, giving her vitality. She knelt down and prayed, "I beg God to forgive me, for wanting to keep in this world a soul of God and forgetting my duty to those whom God has given me. Please kindly leave it to me." Her heart seemed to have completely lightened. The sun had just risen, a flock of small birds chirped, and the church bell rang to announce the morning mass. The atmosphere now became solemn. She felt her suffering ease. She hurried back home, her husband was still sleeping. She kissed his forehead to wake him up, and now she herself showed courage in the face of grief and boldly comforted and encouraged him and her children. "Our fate is in God and number 39's hands," she said. "We must obey His will." Saying this, she hugged and kissed her husband and children, making everyone shocked by her change. She continued, "Through my child resting in the grave, God will give me more strength." Thank you for joining us for today's fairy tale. We hope these stories bring joy and meaning to your day. If you love our channel, please hit the subscribe button so you won't miss any exciting tales. Wishing you a good night and sweet dreams. See you in the next story.